Imagine standing in the snow for a week just to meet one of New York's most powerful mobsters. That's exactly what young Charlie Hegyalji did, and when he finally got a brief acknowledgement, it was enough to set him on a path he'd follow for the rest of his life. From small-time street fights to making his mark in Melbourne's booming drug scene in the 80s, Mad Charlie wasn't just another gangster. He wanted to be Australia's very own mob boss. As he climbed the criminal ladder, his power attracted enemies, leading to a dramatic end that left many questions unanswered. This is the story of Mad Charlie Hegyalji. Charlie Hegyalji, better known as Mad Charlie in the criminal underworld, was born on August 6, 1956, in Hungary. In 1964, his family left their old life behind and moved to Australia, searching for a fresh start. As a young boy, Mad Charlie was obsessed with the idea of becoming a mobster. He idolized the crime bosses of New York and always dreamed of living that life. He would regularly visit the Kill City crime book shop in Melbourne, always on the hunt for more stories about organized crime. At one point, he apparently even flew to New York with his parents and spent a week hanging around popular mafia hangouts just to meet Carlo Gambino, one of the most powerful mafia leaders of all time. When Gambino finally acknowledged him with a pinch on the cheek and a simple hello, Charlie considered it one of the greatest moments of his life. Mad Charlie went to Prahran High and lived in Caulfield. By the time he hit his teens, he was already on the wrong path. Petty crime, street fights, and he had a flair for violence. It wasn't long before he earned the nickname Mad Charlie after biting off someone's nose in a fight. When he was just 15, he wanted to get a job, so he headed to the headquarters of the Victorian Federated Ship Painters and Dockers Union. When the big boss told him to piss off, he apparently pulled out a .38 caliber handgun and aimed it to his face and said, "One day, all of you maggots will be working for me." Years later, when drugs were booming in Melbourne, some of those painters and dockers actually did end up working for Mad Charlie. In the early 70s, Mad Charlie met Chopper while they were both locked up in Pentridge prison. At the time, massage parlors were often fronts for brothels and were operating under the radar. But since they were illegal, if you ran one, you couldn't exactly call the cops when someone tried to rob you. When Mad Charlie and Chopper got out, they linked up and formed a crew. Together, they started hitting up these massage parlors, robbing them blind. And it wasn't just about the easy money. They loved the power and the chaos that came along with it. Now, one of the stories from those days takes us to September 6, 1974. Mad Charlie and the crew decided to hit up the Crest Health Studio, a massage parlor and brothel in the suburb of Armadale. While Chopper waited in the car, Mad Charlie and Mad Archie went inside to use the services. But things didn't go as planned. Mad Charlie was in for a shock when he realized that the masseuse working on him was a man. Without thinking twice, Mad Charlie punched the employee right in the face, setting off a chain reaction of chaos as the crew ransacked the place. The Crest Health Studio did report the robbery to the cops, but they didn't have much to go on. The descriptions of Charlie and the others were too vague, and for a while, they managed to stay under the radar. A few months after the Crest Health Studio incident, things didn't slow down for these guys. On November 29, 1974, Chopper and Mad Charlie hit up another massage parlor, this time in Elwood. The two of them managed to steal about $100, and it didn't take long for the police to catch up with them. But they did connect the dots and tied them both to the earlier robbery at Crest Health Studio, adding another armed robbery charge to their names. In the end, Chopper got off with just 2 years for the armed robbery, while Charlie wasn't so lucky. He ended up with 4 years for the robbery and an extra 8 for the assault. So after those massage parlor robberies, Chopper and Mad Charlie found themselves back in Pentridge. It wasn't long before things took a darker turn inside, and on May 1st, 1975, word went around that Reginald Isaacs, a man that had a dark past with children, was being moved into D Division. Now, as you probably know, in prison, there's an unspoken rule when it comes to guys like that. Everyone felt he had it coming, and apparently Chopper and Mad Charlie were right at the front of the pack. They cornered Isaacs in his cell, and Chopper jumped off the top bunk onto Isaacs' head multiple times. But despite that, Isaacs wasn't going down easily, so Mad Charlie and Chopper apparently tied his hands behind his back and wrapped a bedsheet around his neck and left him hanging in his cell. By the time anyone found him the next morning, it was all over, and Isaacs was confirmed to have taken his own life. Years later, Chopper publicly took credit for the whole thing, saying that someone like Isaacs didn't deserve to live after what he did. But like a lot of Chopper's stories, people started to question how true it was. The autopsy didn't exactly line up with Chopper's claim of jumping on the guy's head. there wasn't any evidence of that, so maybe Isaacs really did take his own life. But either way, we'll probably never know if Chopper and Mad Charlie were responsible. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Mad Charlie had moved on to bigger things. He was deep into the amphetamine trade, running one of the largest operations in the country. And this wasn't your average drug-dealing setup. Mad Charlie wasn't just moving a few packs here and there, he took the business seriously, as he even kidnapped chemists and forced them to cook up the drugs for him. One of the more famous stories involves a young chemistry student named Paul Lester. Charlie snatched him at gunpoint and forced him to churn out amphetamines. It's said that Mad Charlie was also linked up with John Higgs. Now, if you're not familiar with Higgs, he was a major figure in the drug scene. As a founding member of the Black Uhlans Motorcycle Club, Higgs made a name for himself as one of the biggest speed producers in Australia during the 80s. The police even put him at the top of their drug target list during Operation Phalanx. After serving a few years for his role in the amphetamine trade, Higgs, along with others, got caught up in an even bigger operation. They were busted for attempting to smuggle 15 million ecstasy pills hidden inside of tomato cans, which turned out to be one of the largest ecstasy busts in the world. As for Mad Charlie, he took his criminal ambitions to the next level. By this time, he had started calling himself the Don and really leaned into the whole mafia boss vibe. He dressed the part too by wearing sharp suits, expensive watches, and apparently the type of swagger that caught the attention of the big players in the criminal world. According to Chopper, in 1986, Mad Charlie visited Bendigo prison to see him, but things quickly escalated. In the visiting area, another inmate, also mid-visit, said something that set Charlie off. Charlie flew into a rage and wanted to fight him right there, and even flashed a small revolver tucked into his pants. Metal detectors weren't used at the time, and Charlie bringing a gun to a prison visit and trying to start a fight shows just how little regard he had for the consequences. Mad Charlie was paranoid too. He believed people were always watching him, so he started spying on others. He kept notes on cars he thought were following him, and even had false walls built into his properties to hide guns and other supplies. When the cops finally raided his farmhouse, they found a stash of weapons and documents showing Charlie had been spying on Melbourne police stations. Violence followed him wherever he went. In 1989, someone shot him in the stomach outside a house in South Caulfield. He survived, and in the classic underworld fashion, he got revenge by shooting the guy in a St Kilda car park. Then, in 1997, another shootout, but this time both he and his opponent walked away unharmed, but Charlie wasn't so lucky in court. He was charged and spent a year inside before the charges were dropped. No witnesses, no case. By mid-1998, Charlie was back, expecting to pick up where he left off, but the people running things in his absence weren't too keen on handing over the reins. One of those people was apparently Dino Debra. I'm sure many of you on this channel know who he was, but if you don't, he was deep in the drug trade and was suspected of having a couple of bodies under his belt, though he was never charged. On November 23, 1998, Mad Charlie spent the evening hopping between bars in Caulfield and St Kilda. Sometime after midnight, he called Dino Debra and then took a taxi home, asking to be dropped off a little down the street, maybe out of habit, maybe out of caution. It didn't matter. As he walked up his garden path, a gunman stepped out and put 4 bullets in him. His body lay there until morning when Charlie's wife spotted him on their security camera monitor, but the cameras hadn't been recording that night. Dino Debra became a suspect immediately, as police traced the call that was made to him by Mad Charlie. But he never shared what was said on that call, leaving a lot of unanswered questions. Whether Debra was responsible was never proven, and he met the same fate just 2 years later in 2000. On October 14, 2000, Dino Debra was executed outside his home on Cranbrook Street in Sunshine West. Police suspected his lifelong best mates, Benji Venumin and Paul Kalapolitis, of pulling the trigger. Theories swirled that long-standing personal disputes among the Sunshine Boys had finally boiled over, with some even suggesting the hit was payback for Mad Charlie. However, no charges were ever laid against either of them, and in the end, they both met the same fate. There are plenty of other theories about why Mad Charlie was taken out. Some believe he was putting pieces together that made the wrong people nervous. On top of that, he was owed $100,000 at the time, and one way to clear a debt is to get rid of the person you owe. Mad Charlie's fate wasn't unique. Guys like Alphonse Gangitano and Vincenzo Manella met similar ends, gunned down outside their homes by someone who knew exactly when and where to strike. The three ran in the same circles, and in the underworld, that kind of familiarity could be just as dangerous as any rivalry. In the end, it's possible that someone who pulled the trigger on Mad Charlie was more a friend than foe, someone who didn't want to do it, but felt it was the only way out of a tough spot. Charlie had always said, "When my time comes, let it not be at the hands of a laughing enemy, but at the hands of a crying friend." And maybe that's exactly how it played out for him.